Hey, thanks for tuning in. Today it's a very important discussion that I'm going to have with Eduardo Gramaglia from Argentina. And thank you so much, Eduardo, for joining me. And I've been meaning to do this for a long time. It's one of the most important things that we need to discuss today, which is the process and other aspects in terms of translating ancient astrological texts from Greek or Latin or whatever, maybe whatever you're familiar with. I think you are more familiar with Greek. So thank you so much and welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for having me in your program.
Okay, so I think you just received your PhD in philology.
Well, I'm finishing the career now. I finished the career, and now I still have to sort of present my final thesis, which will be done now at the end of February or March. Yes.
Okay, great. So would you like to explain the term philology, because I'm not sure if everyone knows that particular term?
Well, at first I didn't know that career existed, because at university you have what we call literature career, which is modern literature. But then I was telling you that in 2001 I went to one of the hindsight intensives given by Robert Schmidt, and he told me that I should really seriously undertake the study of Greek and Latin, maybe, if I really wanted to know about ancient astrology. So I just went to university and found out that there was a career, a very specific career on ancient languages.
Okay.
It is called Classical Philology, or Classical Ancient Letters, it is called in Spanish also. And it was its main focus is on Greek and Latin.
Okay.
And ancient philology, all that has to do with the ancient world, ancient history, ancient philosophy, and all that, ancient linguistics, and all that. So I was very interested and made up my mind, which was not very easy because I'm a musician and I don't have much free time. But in fact, it was not easy. But well, I got to the end of it. And during that career, I got to know many other things about linguistics, about Sanskrit. I was telling you about many other things that were connected to that. But mainly, what I learned is not that Greek and Latin as a language is all that there is to it. There is more to that, in the sense that there's a real study on manuscripts and what we call the problems of transmission. There's a really big stuff on the fact of critical editions and transmission of the tradition. Because what you find is that aside from studying ancient Greek, you have to face the fact that of the sources, where you get the texts from. There are many manuscripts. There are many copies of the same work. So you have to make out or discern who they were written by, and all many things connected with the handling and transmission, which is sometimes very confused, of those manuscripts. That's what I was really interested about. And in the first translation we published with Ben Dykes, that was Hephaestion of Thebes. That was very easy because I was just translating from the Greek text that had been fixed by David Pingree. Okay. But now the one we issued last year, Theophilus of Edessa, was not so easy because I had to delve into the manuscripts themselves. And there's always what we call a paleographic work to be done, in the sense that you not only have to know Greek, but also to sort of decode all the manuscripts and decide this part of the manuscript was written by such and such an author. Then you have to compare it with other ones. And besides, there's the problem of how do you purchase the manuscripts, which are, they come to you as high definition pictures. So there's a lot of things that you have to deal with, and not an easy but a very fascinating work. And I was delighted to do that. And besides, my work with Ben is very easy. He collects the data, he finds the manuscripts, and then he comes to the editing part. So I translate, and we both discuss the final results. That's what we're doing now with the English edition of Vettius Valens, for instance, which is going to be issued maybe next year, hopefully.
That's something that I'm eagerly awaiting. I mean, Valence's text. So you spoke about your career in philology, but I think your background in astrology is even more far back. When I think you said that you got interested in astrology from your mother.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think I was 16 years old. I found astrology books which my mother had and still has, and so that's where I became interested in astrology. Then, when I was born in a very little town in a province, then I came to this city, Cordoba, to study. I came to study first of all English. Then I decided that I wanted to be a musician because my grandmother had been a pianist.
Okay.
And that's why when I came here, I sort of undertook the serious study of astrology. First, from a very esoteric, so to say, point of view. Then I became interested in the more classical and technical aspects. And then I even became very interested in the astronomical aspects, because my brother is a mathematician at university. And, well, I sort of wanted to understand all the aspects of the celestial sphere and all the trigonometrical aspects. So, well, when you're young, you have much free time, so you study a lot of things. And then, well, I became what we call an astrologer. So I gave counseling, I had clients and all that. But then, my musical profession demanded much more time from me, and that was becoming very difficult. So I just decided that I should, investigate, do research. Maybe I liked to go to Congress, to publish articles and all that, and not very much pursue the job of being an astrologer. But I was an astrologer for 20 years, before that.
So when did your interest in ancient astrology begin? Because I think most of the people in the West start with modern Western astrology or psychological astrology. Not many people are directly exposed to ancient astrology, and I think before 20 years it would have been even more easy that people are only exposed to modern Western astrology. So,
well, I started with psychological modern astrology too.
Okay.
And I was very happy with that. But then I think that that hindsight intensive changed my mind.
Okay.
In 2001. At that time, I was becoming very interested in Dorotheus of Sidon and all the ancient astrologers. And it was that time when I found out that I could purchase books via the internet. So, all the books that you purchase and they are brought to your place. And I found that I could, buy new books that I wanted. And I started to discover that many books on ancient things were published. And my interest was not only ancient astrology, but antiquity in general. I'm very interested in ancient history.
Okay.
Of all the world, so that's how it links with astrology. And then I found out that I've always been interested in learning languages, But then I discovered that my real interest was ancient languages.
Okay.
So this is where I linked both astrology and ancient languages and said to myself, why not translated ancient astrological texts?
Great.
It's sort of rounding out the whole thing. And that's how it started. It was about year 2000.
So your philology career kind of took off after Robert Schmidt kind of
Exactly.
kind of motivated you to take up any ancient language, and you took up Greek, and then philology kind of became your career, and now you're almost going to defend your thesis, and you're soon en route to receive your PhD. So I'm sure there are going to be a lot of translation works that are going to be coming in near or far future. But still, let's get back to the actual core of the video that we are doing today. So, philology and translating, expertise in translating astrology, and also being an astrologer for almost 20 to 30 years. I think it gives a distinct edge, because I think David Pingree, who is one of the most towering figures in terms of ancient astrology translation, was not a professional astrologer, or not. He didn't necessarily have a background in astrology, but today at this point, people like you and Dr. Benjamin Dykes, and there are some other people who are kind of doing translation works as an individual itself, and it is not as big as a deal it was before. And how do you think? I'm sure your kind of background in astrology, and even more so your background in ancient astrology, is helping you in terms of translating the ancient texts in Greek.
Of course, and Pingree was a wonderful scholar, but you said that he was not an astrologer. Fortunately, what he did was fix all the Greek texts of the astrological texts, but also did what we call critical edition. That's at the back at the foot of the Greek text, you can find all the variants in different manuscripts, how he found them. So you can choose, and many times you have to be an astrologer to know how to translate. This is what I think it was Pingree's problem, that he was not an astrologer. And I also think that that problem is shared by others today, who are great scholars but are not astrologers. So in a way, you need astrology to work things out, to understand things, because once you practice astrology, you find a very obscure passage and you say, oh, he must be saying this and that. But that is because you're an astrologer, because you connect with something else that you already know. But that is not the case with scholarly people who just set about translating the texts. And they have many doubts about the meaning of things. I think there's a great combination to be not only to know the language, but also to be an astrologer, because I think you get to understand what it is about. Of course, there are many texts which you never get to know what they are about, even when you're an astrologer, because they're very obscure. But that happens everywhere. But
so you're kind of being a trendsetter, or not just you, but people like you who are into astrology as well as ancient languages are kind of starting or footprinting a legacy in terms of astrologers come translation experts. And I just hope this culture kind of takes off and will be followed in future as well. So In terms of finding manuscripts, I think finding or locating a manuscript is actually the most important job in terms of translating. And once you find a manuscript and you do your paleography stuff and getting it ready to be translated is actually a procedure itself. And once you do that, almost 25 to 30% of the job is done in terms of translating a particular material. So, what is the process of locating a manuscript or something like that? So, for example, you translated Theophilus of Edessa, and how do you generally kind of go about in terms of locating a manuscript and where it is? Is it located in only one country or one particular area, or is it located
I
somewhere
know.
in Europe? And yeah.
Well, the key work for that is the work I quoted you, is the what we call the CCAG. It's it stands for in Latin, Catalogus Codicum Astrologorum Graecorum. That means the catalog of the codices of Greek astrologers. That was a monumental collection of books published by a very well-known Belgian philologist, Franz Cumont, and others, Franz Boer, and all that, and all those very great philologers who, at the beginning of the 20th century, published that set of that record, which included all the manuscript available in European libraries. So you have, for instance, the first volume is a catalog of the Biblioteca Laurentiana, which is a library located in Italy. So you have all the manuscripts that you can find in Italy, in the libraries of Italy. So in the first part of the work, and that's what we tap from when doing Theophilus, you have the enumeration page by page, what we call volume by volume, of every page of a manuscript. So, for instance, you have the manuscript Laurentianus 28.34. Page 1, you have such and such, you have all the Greek titles of the work you find in page 1. Page 1, the reverse, you such and such a thing. So you have the whole catalog of all the things you can find in each manuscript of each library of each place. That's why the whole work, which I call really monumental, encompassed 22 volumes. So that's the work where you have to go to find the sources. So it has already been done by those the philology scholars of the 20th century. So that's the departing point. That's the starting point. That work.
Okay.
And then, of course, in the second part of those books, you have the Greek texts, but of a very of some paragraphs. But of course, those paragraphs are not even the 2% of the things quoted in the first part. So many times you have to find the manuscript, and to find the manuscript, you see that work and you read where it can be located.
Okay.
For instance, you find that in manuscript Angelicus Graecus 29, you have a work by Theophilus. So the Angelicus Graecus is located in the Vatican Library. So you have to write to the Vatican Library to purchase a manuscript, which fortunately they don't know what they contain. Otherwise, you're fascinated to know why the Vatican Library has so many manuscripts on magic and astrology. Say, what?
Yeah.
God, either they don't know what they contain, or they do know and they like the money, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
But so just in Italy, but you have libraries in Spain. Spain is riddled with astrological manuscripts
Oh,
in Moscow, in Germany. But you know, to find the manuscript and where that work is located, you have to go to that work, the
CCH.
CCAG. You know.
Okay, so where is it located actually?
What the CCAG is published, right? It's a collection that has been, it's exhausted now. I mean, there
I
are
mean,
a few, I mean, it
is there
was
a,
published,
is there a
yeah.
specific office where CCAG is located?
No,
Okay,
it has been it has been put into text by many programs like the TLG, for
okay,
instance, but not completely.
okay,
Now you can download half of the books of the in PDF from the internet, because you know the date has expired, and so they're no longer under, you know, copyright and all that. I think you can have you can freely download from the internet up to volume 8
okay,
now.
okay,
But I mean, they're there. They can be got. There are many people who have them in print. I located them in print in a library from Barcelona, and so I remember I purchased that in the year 2008.
okay,
And there was, I think, 2 more others going around in the world, because you know it wasn't edited anymore. It was very old. It's very old material, but it's a key work now for the research, for astrological research.
okay.
Mm.
And so now you kind of find the place where you have the manuscript using the CCAG and its materials, and then you kind of write to those particular places where you can find the manuscript. And the other thing is, they need to send the right manuscript to you, which you're looking forward to, and then do you kind of rely upon only one particular text, or in some cases do you also need 2 or 3 versions of that particular text that you're looking forward to?
Exactly,
So
exactly.
okay,
That's a more complicated part,
okay,
because you have the same texts. First of all, you can also have papyri, right?
okay.
You know, there are many other shapes in which books were written. Before the codices were written, the codex is a very Christian way of putting things. You know, it's like a book. You turn the pages like in a book, in a codex. But before that, you had rolls of papyri. You had palm leaves, which, you know, in India many palm leaves can be found, papyri and all that. But there's more, the material found in papyri and palm leaves. I'm not talking about astrology in Sanskrit. I'm talking about Western or Greek astrology, are very fragmentary. They're very small pieces of things. So where you find complete works is in manuscripts, in codices. Those codices are named there in the CCAG, and you have to find out which codices have the same work.
Okay.
You know, maybe for example, when we translated Theophilus of Edessa, which is a very late author from Byzantium around the 7th and 8th century, we found that not only because of CCIG, but also following Pingre's articles and publications. That's the other thing you have to consider. Not only that CCAG, but also you have to read all the articles published by those philologists, right? And in this case, Pingre had written a very important article named from Baghdad to Byzantium and the recovery of astrology and such a thing, and so on. And so upon reading that and consulting with the CCAG, you can locate where the manuscripts are found.
Okay.
And then you see that the same work is contained or is found in a library in Spain, another one in a library in Italy, and another one. So you try to purchase those manuscripts, which come to you as a file with high definition photographs. That's the only thing you can do. I mean, it's very difficult to go there personally and see the manuscripts. And of course, this would have many disadvantages. You can get ill and die because, you know, ancient manuscript can contain anything. But aside from that, the advantage with photographs, high definition photographs, is that you can zoom in and zoom out, right? So you can sort of see that you not only have the text, the main corpus of the texts, but also you have marginal comments. You know, some scribe has bothered to write some explanation on the margin, which are also very important, and maybe can perhaps contradicts what the text says. And so you have to compare that with another manuscript. You have to decide which is the older one, which you're going to trust more. And, you know, that kind of research, which is, I find fascinating, but it's not really easy, you know.
Okay.
But of course, that's what supposedly the classical philology career trains you for.
Okay.
I say supposedly, but in the end, you find out that you don't end up being very well trained. That's you have to undergo a process of self-training, if you understand what I mean.
I mean, you shouldn't wait to get trained. You kind of get trained by translating. Is that what you're saying?
Of course, it's always the same. When you go to a career, they will teach you Homer, Plato, Aristotle, and every kind of canonic authors. But then, you know, I devoted my whole life to Hellenistic authors. That's a different kind of Greek. You know, if I read Attic language or Homer, it will be a very different, a rather different Greek. It's a dialect. It's another dialect. So this is late Greek, and in the last case of Theophilus, it was very late Greek, to such an extent that many words were not found in a classical Greek dictionary, but in a modern Greek dictionary. You know, that was funny.
Okay, so I think I was getting to what you're talking about, the classical Greek to the modern Greek. So Greek, as it is, a language kind of evolves and changes over a period of time. And when Valens wrote his text in 1st century, and it got transmitted or transmitted to future astrologers in the 3rd century or 4th century, like let's say Firmicus Maternus reading Valens's Anthology. So the kind of interpretation and how astrology is going to be transmitted by the later generation will be in a much more different manner. So how do you deal with the consistency of languages? Let's say you have 2 manuscripts that are written in 2 different periods in the same language. So how do you kind of deal with that kind of inconsistency in manuscripts, and how do you conclude or finalize when you arrive in a conflicting place, like defining a particular concept or something like that?
Well, that can get very difficult, because in astrological texts, you not only find different authors belonging to different periods of history, but you can also find those authors quoting ancient authors. And sometimes you never know what kind of, it's very difficult to know what's the real historical period that they belong to. Maybe there's an archaizing kind of Greek because they quoting ancient texts, and maybe there's a very late text, and this. The problem with this kind of writing is that you don't have a canonical writing, but you have an original text that, say, by Dorotheus of Sidon, for instance, that was copied and commented upon by generations of authors that followed in time. So the line of time is not very easy to discern. Because they're kind of commenting on more ancient texts, and kind of, in a way, paraphrasing, repeating, epitomizing, we say, and summarizing ancient texts. So there's many periods of time contained in one piece of writing. That's what's not very easy to, and that's what we found in Theophilus, for instance, which is very interesting, because Theophilus of Edessa, the last one we published, was located in Byzantium, and around the change from the 7th to the 8th century, the late 8th, the 7th century. And at that time, the whole Hellenistic Greek tradition was being translated into Arabic. You can all, so that was a time where the Arab scholars tapped from the ancient Greeks and translated all the tradition into Arabic. So you can even find words in Arabic. We found one. I remember having found one which I didn't know what it meant in Greek. That was not in the dictionary. It was Talil. It was written in Greek letters. Then I asked Ben. He said, "Well, that must be Talel in Arabic, which was transliterated into Greek." So you have many decisions
from
to
Greek
make.
to Arabic, and then someone comes again and writes from Arabic to Greek.
Well, that's what it seems that is the most interesting thing, that because that tradition at Byzantium during the caliphs was the breaking point, was the sort of critical point from which the whole tradition came into the Western world.
Okay.
And again, I'm talking about the Western tradition.
Sure,
I would like to know much more about the Sanskrit tradition. No one talks about that. No one. I mean, Pingree to a certain extent, but when I went to university, that was one of the main things that was acknowledged but never solved, is that if India is an essential part of our linguistic history, why is not India in our history classes? Because it belongs to the Eastern world. But I mean, come on, if Sanskrit was proved to be one of the sister languages of Greek and Latin, so why not include India in the ancient history studies? It's all the debate that has been going on here in the Western world. And and after the discovery of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and all those cities, I mean, the whole thing is not so clear, even as regards chronological time. I mean, at least they are at least 8,000 years old, at least.
Sure.
So there are many things that no one dares to deal with here in Western society, and one of them is India.
Okay.
I'm afraid to say.
Translating Sanskrit texts, I'm not very sure about it because I'm not entirely into it. So I don't know, maybe someone who has already done it would give you a better idea in terms of the process of translating the Sanskrit texts. But I'm sure there is a lot of untranslated or untouched works from the ancient writings are still lying, which are yet to be even researched. At least I think there are around 2,500 untranslated astrology texts that are yet to be translated. That are yet to be ever translated. So it is still virgin text, and there is a lot of manuscript that is in place. And I'm talking about the city in which I'm living in. So it's Chennai. I think you've been to Chennai. Uh, so it's just that one place, and around India, considering the number of archaeological societies that are in place, I'm sure there will be a lot of untranslated Sanskrit texts. So there is a lot of scope if someone is actually willing to translate some of the Sanskrit astrological texts. So I think I really wanted to ask this question. Mark Riley has already done translation of Valens's Anthology. So is there a specific reason why you and Ben kind of took up uh, the translation of Vettius Valens' Anthology?
Okay. Before replying to that question, I would just add something to what you first said about Sanskrit manuscripts.
Okay.
By the way, it's your job. You have to, you have to, become a Sanskrit scholar and translate all those manuscripts. You have in your city many manuscripts. When I went to Adyar, the headquarters of the Theosophical Society there in Chennai, I remember that there are there's a very big library on Eastern culture and literature, but there's also what they call the archives. I didn't know what that meant. And I remember that one night I was asked to play the piano there, and we gave sort of concerts. There were many musicians gathered there. It was a seminar on the Bhagavad Gita given by an Indian who now works as a mathematician in Canada, Ravi Ravindra. And I remember that after that, I wanted to see the archives and what they contained. And I noticed that the director of the archives now, who now passed, I think he passed out last year. Okay. Well, I saw him, and the next day I just popped up myself and said to him, I'm the pianist of yesterday. May I see the archives? And he said yes. So I was allowed to see those archives, and I almost fainted down. There was thousands of palm leaves, kanjurs, and all those, Tibetan-shaped manuscripts. And I was amazed to see how many astrological Sanskrit manuscripts there were, completely untranslated.
Yeah.
So I was very interested to know whether Pingree had taken notice of that, and now he didn't know about those manuscripts.
Yeah,
they were not mentioned. He mentions in a way the archives of Adyar, but no one is allowed to enter those archives. So I found that you have in your city so many astrological Sanskrit manuscripts.
Yeah.
So that's the work you have to undertake to translate all of them.
Yes, probably.
Yeah. But then answering the question on Vettius Valens, why Vettius Valens? Well, when we published Theophilus, not last year, it was June 2017 that we published it. And Ben said to me, how about undertaking something that is not so specific, that sells more?
Okay.
So I wondered what he meant by selling more. I mean, something more, a more famous author and all that. And he suggested that he gave me 3 or 4 chances, or 3 or 4 possibilities. And one of them was to continue with our tendency to translate horary and electional texts from antiquity, which we have been doing. Hephaestion, both Hephaestion and Theophilus, was about horary. Horary. I mean, what Pingree called cathartic astrology. And there was a very interesting part in Chris Brennan's book where he says that he was convinced that there was no horary in Hellenistic time. And thanks to those books, Hephaestion and Theophilus, he realized that, in fact, there was real horary questions. You know, that was a very interesting thing that I hadn't noticed it myself. You know,
and that is the war period where people start using horary astrology to answer questions based on war.
Well, in ancient times, you know, you have the Prajna Marga in Sanskrit. Prajna means meaning question, right? I think, yeah. But in ancient Western astrology, you don't have the limits well defined. There was just one thing called cathartic, which means astrology of the beginnings. So, you know, the three branches of Hellenistic astrology. The first one, which is called Catholicos Astrologia. Catholicos meaning worldly or global astrology. It is now known as mundane astrology. It's the first astrology ever to appear on the planet in Mesopotamian times, of course. They only practiced mundane astrology, belonging, or that had to do with kings, with climatic conditions and all that. Then the second branch was what is called Genetlialogike Astrologia, or astrology of the births. That's to say, natal astrology. Yeah. I think the first horoscope was to appear about I think 84 BC or so. The first individual horoscope. No one knows why. There might be political reasons. Maybe the state was no longer in great shape, so all the people who had money started consulting the Baru priest or astrologers. No one knows, but you know, the natal astrology turns up in Mesopotamia. Then all the Greeks added new techniques, of course. This is what we call Hellenistic astrology. But of course, there was another branch, very ancient branch, called Cathartique Astrologia, or astrology of beginnings. This is what we now call electional, horary, and event astrology.
Okay.
Now, they were not, they were all together in ancient times. And the division is just made for study reasons. Then all those who translated the text started separating them and saying, well, this is electional, this is horary, and all that. Well, that was as regards our project with horary texts. But then, I'm resuming my answer, Ben said, why not Vettius Valens, the complete Vettius Valens? The only complete translation of Vettius Valens was done by Mark Riley. I not always agree with many of his decisions, but you know, it's a very decent translation. What we have now, and was a very good idea, really. But there are also other texts by Valens which are included in Pingree's edition, called Additamenta in Latin, which is all the things that were added. It seems that there's some kind of unclassified material that was added to that. So maybe it would be a great idea to translate everything. I haven't spoken to Ben yet about those additional material, what he plans to do or what, because we have just gone through the first book. I have just finished translating the first book of the Anthology. And you know, the books are very, in ancient times, what we call books are very, you know, they're not big books.
Okay.
They're treatises. So they're like chapters. So we considered that it was a very good idea to have the whole of Valens published and edited with comments by him. Well, that hasn't been done yet because, you know, Bob Schmidt could translate up to book 7, I think. And there are the books 8 and 9, which are very difficult and very enigmatic because they contain lots of things with, you know, canonic things with divisions of time and things that really we have to still make out what they mean, right? And so I said, okay, let's do Vettius Valens.
So it's going to be a very long process.
Yeah, and I think it's very well known to the people, and it's very different it's a bit different than Theophilus, who no one knows Theophilus. He was a very interesting astrologer, but it was kind of erased from history because Theophilus was a war astrologer. He even took part in war conflicts. It's very interesting because apparently he served one of the caliphs there in Baghdad, but he was a Christian, so he's in himself a very enigmatic figure. What was a Christian astrologer doing under the service of a caliph? I mean, it's really it's weird in a sense. But well, we consider that Vettius Valens would be a very well, let's say, it would sell well, and the people would receive it gladly, so to say.
Okay, I think as it is, I'm expecting this kind of publication very eagerly, and I think assuming from what you say, I think Valens's text that you're translating is going to be one more step further in terms of perfecting the anthology that we have today.
Well, we hope so. In any new book that comes out is not supposed to be a judgment on the other books.
Sure.
We hope that it will be an improvement, but it always happens in all the universities, all the published material at any university. Anything that comes new is supposed to be a kind of improvement on the extant or existing things. That's why we do it in a way.
Yeah,
that's why. But what I really think is important to realize is that all those other publications were really important steps toward another one. So it's not that we're trying to deny or do a judgment on other translations. No, it's they were very important. They're even useful to me when I'm translating, because I compare different choices and I compare different solutions to the problems of translating. So, you know, on one hand, we hope that we do is going to be an improvement, but it does not mean that we're judging or, in many cases, the other translations.
There is no question or something about judgment. I think it's Mark Riley did wonderfully well with the resources that he had. So I think kind of various versions of astrological texts should come, because that has been the way in the past. And there is a lot of versions of Brihat Parashara, Horashastra, but still people translate more. So I don't think there is any kind of judgment that comes here, but it is just the next version and just another step that that astrologers are going to have tomorrow.
Yeah, it's another step. Yes, we're trying to offer something that we really think will help astrologers, and that's the difference between what we call academic publications, because, you know, in university, I mean, let's be frank, let's be honest. I belong to university too. But what I see is that the people don't care very much about the others. They just want to publish something and be known for that. I don't think they have that desire of sort of filling in something that is missing or contributing with something. They just want to be known. It's really a question of ego now. Well,
Okay.
it's something like, you know, the Western university is going, I think, is going through. So in this case, when we translate astrological texts, we hope that they would in some way be helpful to others, be a contribution in any way. That's why we're doing it.
Great. So, yeah, I think that pretty much brings us towards the end of this session, and maybe we'll get together and talk about some other things in future, because this kind of topic is never going to end, and
of course, it's endless. Yes, I know. This is a very gigantic topic. It's fascinating, and as I told you, it's something that for which you're not really trained at university. You undergo a process of self-training, self-study. You discover things. You try to work out or imagine how you can solve problems. Sometimes you don't solve all the problems, you know, in our translations, that many times in a footnote you can find the statement, we don't know what this means. Well, I mean, it's honest. Maybe it's our limit, it's our problem, but we didn't get to know what that phrase or sentence meant. So, and that happens to everyone, even in universities, you know. The study of the ancient world, you know, is not very easy.
Yeah, for sure.
So, no, but that's really fascinating. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you fed me with a lot of things which have been kind of pestering my mind for a long time about the translation part. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. And
thank you, Aswin. It was so nice to meet you. And it was so nice of you to have me on your show.
Sure. Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Till next time.